Hello again, everybody. This is Mr. Everything coming back at you with another Wargaming and miniature video. In this video, we're going to be painting the Jagdtiger. That's right, the Warlord games, Italeri model, the Jagdtiger. Alright, we're going to be painting it in the ambush pattern, which is kind of what you see on the cover here. It's also right here on the back. It's the 3-color, with the ambush dots. And the way we're going to go ahead and do that is I'm going to use this cut right wax paper and this tape, which is a 3M painter's tape. I've already primed the entire model using desert yellow. That is going to be the base coat. The undercoat, this part right here, I missed because the barrel was up. But that's okay because I'm actually going to spray this 2 more times, one with brown and one with green. And so I'll just make sure that I don't put one of my stencils over the end of the barrel. All right, so let me set that up to the side. And basically, the painting guide on the inside kind of gives you a general idea of how it's going to look once it's all painted and put together. When I took a look at this, I looked at the primary color, the majority of the paint is actually green. The yellow and the brown are lesser, and they look like they're set aside like in splotches. So what I'm going to do is create stencils for the yellow, paint brown over it. Then I'm going to put the stencils over the brown and then paint green over it, and then just peel the stencils and I'll get a camouflage pattern. All right, so let's go ahead and create a stencil. The way we would create a stencil is I use wax paper, and then I take the 3M painter's tape. This is like a 2-inch wide, and then what I do is I pull strips off and stick it directly onto the wax paper. All right, so let me go ahead and pull some of this out. And I create a stencil that is way too big for the amount of templates that I'm going to need for the Jagdtiger. But any excess stencil or any excess painter's tape stencil paper that I create, I'll be able to use on any future projects. So what I do is I just overlap the tape a little bit on top of the wax paper, and you overlap the painter's tape so that when you do cut out the stencil, the 2 pieces of tape or what have you will actually stick together so your stencil doesn't fall apart. Okay, so let me just go ahead and finish layering this, and then I'll be right back. All right, so now we've got it all layered. What I'm going to do is, see, this is the back side of the wax paper. I'm going to just take a pair of scissors and I'm going to cut off any of the excess just to make it easier and manageable to handle. All right, once I get this cut off, I'll be right back. All right, now looking at this as a guide, I'm noticing that the stencils only need to be about 1 inch or 2 long on this tank, So what I do is I take a pair of scissors and I just cut out in a random pattern, just as your will, as your heart desires. You just cut out basically a squiggly line, and that's the start of the stencil. And then I cut the back side of it out because I wanted to round it out. It doesn't have to be sharp. I don't want it to be sharp, but if it is sharp, a sharp angles, that's fine as well. There's no wrong way to do it. And I try to cut it out so it's about a 1/2 inch wide, kind of like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out a number of these to attach to my armored vehicle. Okay, so let's cut out another squiggly line. Right, and I'm using the part of the stencil that I had already cut to kind of give it, use that as one of the sides of the stencil. If you want, I used to do this in the past where I would take a pen and I would draw what the stencils are going to look like ahead of time. But that's totally unnecessary because what you're trying to do is just get a random pattern. It's not supposed to be, it's not supposed to be precise. All right, when I get that done, I'll be right back. All right, so we got them cut out. You can see that I've got this extra paper that I'm not using. So I've got some stencils that are going to cover the desert yellow. And then there are stencils also that are going to be covering the brown before I finalize it with green. So I just take a look at a variety of different sizes and shapes. And then I find places on the tank where I think it'll fit and look good. And then what you do is you peel off the backside of the stencil, which is is that wax paper. Pull the wax paper off, and now you've got a stencil, a sticky stencil. Now, it's not going to be perfect because the tank or whatever model you're attaching it to is going to have greebling, which is like it'll have bumps and it'll have parts of the model that stick up. Like in this case, you got a bumper and a bracket that holds the barrel. You've got a light. You've got a skirt on the side, and so what I do is I just press it on as best as I can, bending the stencil around and curving it around the edges, and anywhere that there's a little bit of separation, I use my fingernail to kind of push the paper in to make sure. And then I also you have to understand that if you let it sit for a couple of minutes or whatever, it might pop off, because normally this tape would just lay flat, but when you've got it going around corners and stuff like that, it's not made for that. All right, and so here we go. We've got a bunch of stencils on different areas, in between, over, on top of things. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out. I'm going to spray it brown. Okay, this is with it sprayed brown. And then we're going to let this dry before we put any stencils on prior to the green spray paint. All right, this is with the brown dried. I only let it dry for about an hour. My brown spray paint dries very fast. So now when I put these stencils on, I put them on where they're adjacent to the other stencils so that the tan and the brown will be together. And then, but basically I do exactly the same thing, right? I look for areas where the stencil will fit. I place it on, and then I make sure I press it on down in between all the little cracks and crevices using my fingernails. But remember, I'm trying to lay the stencil next to the other stencils. And sometimes you can, if you want, overlap the stencils a little bit. If the stencils overlap, that would be great, like one stencil and another stencil. There's no shame in that. All right, let's go ahead and put on another stencil. I put on about somewhere between 5 to 6 of these stencils to cover the entire vehicle. You can use larger stencils or smaller stencils depending on the way you want your camouflage pattern to look. All right, we got quite a few of these stencils on, and now I'm going to just press them down before I spray them. Just trying to make sure that there's no gaps between this or under the stencils, because when you spray, it might go under the stencil, and you want it to sometimes that's okay because then it'll look like an airbrush, but I prefer to have it as tight to get nice clean lines. And then I spray it with green. I sprayed it with an olive drab green over the entire thing. I'm going to let that dry, and then you pull the stencils off. You just peel them off and you get something that looks like this, which is the multiple colors, right? Now, going through my model colors, I find colors that are basically the colors of the spray paint that you used, like the olive green and the green ochre, because I wanted to, you want to match up your colors. All right, now the first color we're going to use is the ochre, the yellow. And we're going to paint it on with dots, and we're going to put these dots on everything that's not the yellow. And I like to put them in like little patterns of 2 or 3, and you're trying to scatter them about, but not overwhelm it. You gotta kind of learn, just experiment or just kind of visualize where these dots would go and place them all over the green. But I'm also going to be placing it on the brown as well. We're going to be using all 3 colors, the brown, the green, and the ochre like I'm using. And any color that you're currently painting will be painted on as dots on the other 2 colors. So like green will go on the yellow and the brown brown will go on the yellow and the green, and the yellow will go on the brown and the green. I hope that makes sense. Okay, and then like I said, you just put like 3 dots. Let me go ahead and cover this model, and then I'll be right back. All right, so we got the yellow all over. I'm just painting the back right now, but you can see the yellow dots on the green and the brown. And then once I get all those yellow dots done, you can see kind of basically what you're looking at. All right, now we're going to go ahead and move on to the brown, and then we're going to coat the tank with the brown dots. And we're going to be putting those dots into the yellow areas and the green areas. All right, and it's done basically, if not exactly, the same way. So we just put dots all over the vehicle. Once I get these brown dots on, I'll be right back. All right, continuing to put the brown dots on. Now that all the brown dots are on, we're going to move on to green. Now, before I start putting the green dots on, there's something I just want to point out. It's hard to see the brown dots on the green, and it's going to be hard to see the green dots on the brown. But they're there, and it will affect the overall look of the vehicle. So let's go ahead and get all the green dots on, and then I'll be right back. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to a German red-brown primer. It's a surface primer, and what we're going to do is we're going to paint the inside of the top hatch, which that inside, if the hatch was laying down like it is on this model or standing up, you'd want it to be basically where you see where I'm painting right there, the inside of the hatch, and then we're going to paint the edges and the hinges. And then what I'm going to also do is we're going to paint the exhaust pipes, that same red-brown primer. There's many different primers that you can use, or I should say interior colors that you can use. You can use like a very light green-white on the inside if you want, but I like the brown primer. All right, let's paint the top part of the exhaust pipes. All right, once I get that painted, we'll be right back. All right, now before we apply the dry rust, what I want to do is go ahead and paint the spare treads on the side of the turret. And I'm using what's called boiler black. It's a P3 color. It's really good. It's a super dark, it's a metallic black. And so I'm painting that on, I'll be using this on all the treads. All right, and because when I apply the rust to the vehicle, I want to apply additional rust to the treads as well. So I don't want to apply the rust and then later go in and paint the treads and then not have them rusty. So we paint them first. We paint the tracks first. And once I get the tracks painted, we'll be right back. Now there's a couple of additional parts like the jack in the back and a couple of the there's like these track tools on the back. They're right here on the top. These are spacers, or I don't know what they're actually, the nomenclature is. I know they're used for attaching your tracks back together once they fall apart. They're kind of like what's the word, like clamps. All right, so once those clamps and the jack is painted, then we'll just move on to the next step. Now I also want to go ahead and put a few of the decals on before I apply the rust, because if any of the rust falls into a place where a decal should be, I want the decal to actually look like it was flaked off during the rust. So the decals have to go on first. The two little crosses go on the back corners of the turret portion of the tank. The The larger crosses will go on the sides along with numbers. Now I use microsol. I coat the tank with the microsol where I'm going to apply the decal. What that does is it prepares the surface for the decal. It's not super important on this part. If it's a flat area, I just do it anyway, no matter what, even if it's a flat area. But it's very important if you're putting a decal on an area with ridges or imperfections or dents, so the decal will actually melt down into those places. So now once the microsol is on, then you soak your decal like you normally would, and then you apply it. I use tweezers and a brush to apply my decals. Now once I get the two corners placed, there we go, I'm getting ready to place one corner. Once I get these two corners placed, then we'll move on to the sides. I use the brush to place it. The water is, I also use a brush to kind of move it around to adjust its position. And then I will take tissue and soak up any of the excess water that comes off the decal. And then I will use the paper towel to press the decal to make sure that any water under the decal is actually pressed out from underneath it. And this is an important step if, again, it's an extremely, not porous, but like has a bunch of ridges or bumps, then the pressure is very important. Now, once the decals dry, what I'll do is I will go over them with the microsol like I'm doing right here, because that top coat of microsol will actually cause the decals to melt. And when it does that, it melts it onto the model and gives it a painted on look. Now, I would recommend being very careful when applying microsol on top of a decal, and don't brush the decal. I like to dab it on. Basically, if you brush it, you could, because it's being melted, it could damage the decal. So be very careful when applying the microsol. All right, we're going to go ahead and use the larger cross on the side. We've already coated the side with microsol, so there's an undercoat where it's prepared. And then we're going to position that and use paper towels to soak out all the water. After we get the two side crosses on, we're going to apply some numbers. And the number that I chose was 122. My understanding is the first number is what company that it comes from. If there is like 4 companies in a battalion, you'll get 1, 2, 3, and 4 on that first number, letting you know what company it's from. And then the second number should be what platoon it's from. And you should get a number between 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the last number is the actual tank in that platoon, which I think it can go all the way up to 6, but usually it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, because you got your 4 tank platoons, 4 platoons in a company, and then you've got your 4 companies in your battalion. Now, there are some tank regiments that you put an R at the front, and that means it's part of the regimental headquarters. All right, sorry, I went into a little history lesson there, but that's one. I'm putting 122, so it's the first company, second platoon, second tank in that platoon. And once those are applied, I also put the microsol on top of those numbers and the cross and the back cross. Basically, I give it everything a second coat of microsol. And now we're getting ready to do the dry rust. This is an interesting technique I learned from a different YouTuber. Couldn't remember the name, but basically we're using a very dark gray to represent the metal that's underneath and the rust, and you mix it together, and what you'll get is kind of a gray-red look. All right, so dry rust by Army Painter is a really good color, mixed with the gray, of course. But to apply it, we don't use a brush. We're actually going to use some foam, and this is the same foam that you would get in a blister pack for a miniature. They do make brushes with those foam tips at the end, but you don't need it when you can make your own. Okay, so put a little bit of this dry rust in my palette. It's a very thick mixture. And then what we'll do is we'll put Necromancer Cloak, which is an extremely, it's not like Vallejo's dark gray. Vallejo's dark gray is almost black. I just wanted kind of a German gray. So we go with Necromancer's Cloak, or you could use German gray from Vallejo. You can see how dark the gray is or how light the gray is. And then we just stir it up and we get that orange look. We get that orange-gray mixture. Okay. There we go. Starting to look kind of reddish gray. That's the consistency or the color or the rust that I want. And then once I get it mixed, what we'll do is we'll use one of these foam. What I did was I cut one of the pieces of foam into 4 pieces so that I could use it for a variety of different tanks. And then I fold the 4 corners up so that I could grip it. And then it'll turn into kind of like a little, I don't know, a pad. And then I'll put that into the paint concoction, the rust concoction. But it's too much. So I brush a little bit off into the palette and then onto the paper towel. We dab it on the paper towel because that's too thick, and now it's starting to thin out, and that's what you want. You don't want it to be too much rust. And then I put it in the corners, edges, and I just dab it on. And you can kind of get a feeling for how much paint is actually coming off of your applicator to the vehicle, and if it's not enough, we just go in for a little bit more. And basically it's just going to make some of the edges look like the paint's flaked off or that it started to rust in those areas. So yeah. And you can be pretty liberal with it. You know, now I don't just go directly onto the sides of the vehicle. You can, but I prefer to just hit the corners and the edges and anything that looks like it would suffer the most wear and tear. Like under where the tracks are, and if there's like around the engine compartment, the top of the engine compartment, I would hit that a few times. and basically I just hit a little bit of everything. A lot in the front, like the front edges. All right, now once we get all the rust on there, I just take this little foam thing and just toss it. Now I'm also applying direct application of the rust to the bottom edges of these tracks on the side. Now, it's not the same mixture that I used to dab it on. This is actually a watered down version. I've added about a 50% water so it will blend with the tracks. It'll kind of, you'll see the track color kind of shining through. I'll do it on the anything that's metallic right now. I'll put a little rust on there. Yeah. All right, that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and let this sit for a second, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, so now I want to go ahead and take care of the commander. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint his uniform a dark gray. It's almost a black gray. I didn't want to paint him like flat black because I think that is just too dark of a color. I wanted it to be more of a gray color. It'll give it more of a fabric look. And then once I get the gray all painted over the entire thing, then I'll go at it with, I'll touch his face with some flesh. Okay, now the next color I'm pulling out is pig iron. This is going to be my gunmetal. This is what I'm going to paint on the AA machine gun in the back, the MG42, I believe, and the machine gun in the front, the Hull machine gun. And then I'm also going to be painting the cabling and the tools along the outer sides. There's the machine gun in the front, the Hull machine gun. And the cabling. That was the shovel, the ends of the cables. Now, as I paint the cables, there are these little parts on the cabling that are the brackets that hold the cable in place. Well, I skip over those spots because they would be colored the same color as the camouflage pattern. And there are some breaker bars in there as well between the cables. trying to avoid the portions of the cable that actually show the little straps that hold everything in place. I'm skipping over those. All right, once I get the sledgehammer and the axe and the bolt cutters and both sides finished, I'll be right back. All right, now I'm just going to go ahead and touch up the face of the commander with some flesh. And then I'm also going to use some red brown to touch up any of the wood handle and stock of the machine gun, as well as the shovel, the axe, the sledgehammer. All right, so once we get those done, I'll be right back. All right, we're back with that boiler black for the tracks. And you might notice that I pulled out some wax paper. That's because the track paint is going to get pretty low on the treads. And when I put it down, I don't want that paint to either stick to the table or get on my table. So I just put the wax paper down. All right, so let's get the tracks, the underside of the track and the top of the track, the inside of the tracks that you would see from a gamer's perspective, all painted. And once I get all those painted, I'll be right back. All right, now one of the last steps we do is we're actually going to apply a wash over the entire tank. I'm going to use a light tone, and I also use the Quick Shade Wash Mixing Medium because I think the washes come out a little bit too thick, and the mixing medium will allow it to run and get into all the cracks and crevices easier. So for every 2 parts mixing medium, I put 3 parts wash. In this case, it's not always that mixture, but for this tank, I did 3 parts wash and 2 parts mixing medium. I mixed that up, and then what we're going to do is we're going to paint that over the entire vehicle, including the figure, the tracks, the bogey wheels, everything. And that was another reason why I got the wax paper as well, because this wash, if you apply it liberally, which I am, over the entire model, it might run a little bit. Also, you'll notice how it's darkening or changing the color of the base colors, right? You can see how it's darkening everything down. Not a whole lot, but just enough to make a difference. Now, with this wash, what it'll also do is it'll get down into all the little cracks and crevices, and it'll really make them stand out. It'll highlight the details of the model. I put it on. I specifically make sure that I put it on the recently painted metal parts, because I want them to have a little bit of this kind of a rusty looking color, and that this wash will allow for that. All right, so let's coat this whole thing with this wash, and then I'll be right back. All right, he's completely washed. So now we're going to have to let this dry. Washes take a couple hours to dry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this sit overnight and dry. And then in the morning, I'll come in and I will spray it with my matte sealer. And then we'll take a look at it tomorrow. Okay, I lied. I mixed up some black paint and water, and I made it kind of like what you would think an ink would be. And then using a very fine tip brush, I'm dipping this water and paint mixture down into all my little engine compartment slots. The engine compartment has these filters, air filter covers, and I wanted the inside of those to be like a blackish gray wash color. And so what we're doing is we're painting inside of those. Also, you'll see the circular filters as well. Those have those same grooves as well, and so I will fill those in as well. All right, so you get a good look at the engine compartment slots, and then we'll let this dry overnight, and we'll come back at it in the morning with a matte sealer. All right, I'll see you in the morning. All right, it's in the morning. I've already sprayed it with the matte sealer, and this is what you're looking at. You're looking at the rusty tracks, you're looking at the metallic cabling, the camouflage pattern that I used with the stencils, the dots, making it the ambush pattern, the commander, the machine guns, the tools, the numbers. It's hard to tell that those are decals. I hope you enjoyed watching me paint this. I did the unboxing review in part 1. I did the assembly in part 2. And we did the painting in part 3. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe. And come back and watch more miniature wargaming tutorials and videos in the future. All right. I had a blast putting this thing together and painting it up for one of my customers, and I hope he's going to enjoy it. It's a beautiful piece. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.